This story quietly marches through the gray, glorious, and genuinely bizarre world of daily life in the Soviet Union, where everything was equal, but some things were just more missing than others. We'll explore the legendary absurdity of planned economy logistics, like receiving three left boots and no rights, being told you didn't need a refrigerator because winter existed, or standing in line for 4 hours only to discover you're actually in the wrong line for something else that doesn't exist. The black humor drips from details like home appliances that required gentle persuasion, i.e., says kicking, newspapers full of triumph but no toilet paper, and slogans promising utopia by 1980 or maybe 1990. Stay tuned. With stories of communal apartments, mandatory optimism, and broken elevators that were always temporarily out of service, this is a bedtime stroll through glorious dysfunction, perfect for falling asleep to the soft hum of a boiling kettle and the rattling pipes of history. The wind, a biting Siberian cousin of a breeze, whipped stray strands of my babushka's kerchief across her face. She didn't flinch. Decades of bread queues had hardened her against the elements, much like they'd hardened her against the absurdities of the Soviet system. We stood, shoulder to shoulder, a silent, shuffling congregation in the heart of a bustling city square. The air hung thick with the scent of exhaust fumes and the faint, yeasty promise of bread, a promise often broken, like a lover's vow whispered in the dead of night. This wasn't just any bread queue. This was the bread queue, the one that snaked around the monument to Lenin, a testament to both the party's enduring presence and the people's unwavering patience, or perhaps resignation. It was a microcosm of Soviet life itself, a chaotic ballet of jostling elbows, hushed complaints, and the unspoken rules of a social order dictated not by decree, but by necessity. To my left, a woman with a face etched with the map of a hard life, meticulously knitted a tiny, absurdly perfect scarf. Her nimble fingers moved with a speed that belied the sluggish pace of the queue. I wondered if she was knitting a future for her grandchild, a future less reliant on the fickle supply of bread. To my right, a young man, perhaps a student, stared intently at a worn copy of Pushkin, his brow furrowed in concentration, oblivious to the rhythmic shuffle of feet around him. He was escaping, at least for a while, the reality of this absurd ritual. My internal monologue, as always, was a running commentary on the sheer, breathtaking absurdity of it all. Bread, I thought, the staff of life, the cornerstone of civilization, reduced to a daily lottery, a game of chance, played not with cards, but with aching feet and simmering impatience. The unspoken rules of the bread queue were as rigid as the party line. Cutting in line was an act of social suicide. To even contemplate it was to invite a barrage of icy glares and muttered curses. The most seasoned veterans of the queue, women whose faces seemed to have been carved from granite, possessed an almost supernatural ability to detect the slightest hint of queue jumping. Their collective disapproval was a force more potent than any internal security operative. Conversations were brief, utilitarian. Do you think they'll have rye today? They ran out before noon yesterday. My niece is getting married. This bread is for the wedding cake, one woman confessed. The wedding cake was a testament to the absurdity itself. Flour, sugar, these things were prizes, not staples. Hours crawled by. The sun, a pale disk in the hazy sky, offered little warmth. Children whined, adults grumbled, and everyone exchanged weary glances, a shared understanding passing between us, a silent acknowledgement of our collective plight. We were united, bound together not by ideology, but by our shared hunger for bread. A surge of movement rippled through the queue, a collective gasp, then hushed whispers. Hope, fragile as a butterfly's wing, fluttered in the air. The bakery doors swung open, revealing a vision of pale, crusty loaves. It was a scene of controlled chaos. People surged forward, a human tide washing over the threshold. My babushka, a veteran of countless such battles, maneuvered through the throng with surprising agility. She emerged victorious, clutching a loaf of bread, its warm, yeasty scent filling the air. A small victory, a daily triumph in a life where small victories were all we had. Back home, the bread was the centerpiece of our meager supper, a simple meal eaten in silence, punctuated only by the clinking of spoons and the quiet sighs of contentment. It wasn't just bread we were consuming a moment of peace, a brief respite from the constant struggle, the relentless rhythm of shortages. The bread, in a way, transcended its mundane nature. It was a symbol of our shared endurance, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of systemic absurdity. But the quiet contentment wouldn't last. The next day, the queue would reform, its serpentine form stretching out, a silent, patiently waiting testament to a system that promised plenty but delivered only scarcity. It was a rhythm as familiar and inescapable as our own heartbeat, the rhythm of shortages, the rhythm of life in the Soviet Union. And it was, in its own peculiar way, a comedy. A tragicomedy played out daily in the squares and streets of a nation struggling to keep its balance. The laughter, when it came, was a quiet, nervous chuckle, a release of tension born from the shared experience of enduring the absurd. It was a form of survival, a way to keep the spirit alive, to keep the hope flickering in the face of endless queues and empty shelves. The bread queue was a ritual, a dance with despair, a testament to our perseverance. And as I stood in line, I knew, despite the cold, despite the hunger, that this absurd ritual was, in its own way, a binding force, a strange, sad, and ultimately darkly humorous testament to the human spirit. The next morning, the ritual would start all over again, and somehow we would all be there. The bread, thankfully, was a success, but the victory felt hollow, a fleeting moment of satisfaction in a landscape of persistent deprivation. The next morning, the familiar ache in my feet reminded me of another pressing issue: shoes, or rather, the lack thereof, more specifically, the lack of matching shoes. My current footwear situation was, to put it mildly, a disaster. One shoe, a faded brown leather number rescued from a dusty bin at the back of a state-run department store, bore the faint scent of mothballs and the distinct memory of someone else's foot. Its partner, a somewhat darker shade of brown, held together precariously by several layers of shoelaces and a profound sense of defiance, seemed to belong to a different era entirely. They were, to use the delicate terminology favored by my babushka, a charming mismatch. The quest for a matching pair began, as most quests in the Soviet Union did, with a queue. This was not the glorious, bread-fueled queue, however. This was the queue of the shoe department, a different beast entirely, a creature of even greater bureaucratic complexity. First, there was the matter of acquiring a voucher. No mere rubles would suffice in this transaction. Oh no, this was a ritual that involved numerous forms, each requiring a specific stamp from a specific official in a specific office. Each stamp, it seemed, took its own sweet time arriving, a game of bureaucratic ping pong with my precious time as the ball. I spent a morning navigating a labyrinthine network of offices, each guarded by a weary looking bureaucrat who seemed to take a perverse pleasure in the slow dispensing of stamps. The air hung heavy with the scent of stale coffee and bureaucratic despair. I felt like an ant lost in a colossal, indifferent ant hill. Finally, armed with the necessary documentation, I joined the shoe queue. This queue was a different beast altogether. The bread queue was a matter of survival, a daily necessity. This was a matter of pride, or at least a desperate attempt to avoid the social stigma of mismatched shoes. This was the queue of the truly committed. It was a queue that snaked through the department store, a brown serpent winding its way past displays of drab, identical-looking shoes, all in shades of grayish-brown or military green. The selection was, to put it kindly, underwhelming. There were shoes, many shoes, but there was a stunning lack of variety. They were all essentially the same shoe, mass-produced with the efficiency of a perfectly oiled machine, but utterly lacking in any form of personal style or appeal. I endured the queue, enduring the slow, agonizing crawl towards the counter, my feet throbbing with the promise of further misery. Finally, it was my turn. The saleswoman, a woman whose face resembled a crumpled newspaper, regarded me with the same enthusiasm one would show a particularly dull potato. "What size?" she asked, her voice devoid of all warmth. 42, I replied, my voice betraying a hint of hope. She rummaged through a pile of shoes, her movements as languid as a sloth waking from a long nap. She produced 2 shoes. They were, predictably, the same dull, grayish-brown color. But a flicker of excitement ran through me. They were a match. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel a surge of optimism, a brief respite from the usual bleakness of shoe-related existence. Then I examined them more closely. One shoe was slightly larger than the other, a subtle imperfection that would lead to a painful limp within half an hour of wearing them. The leather was cracked and worn in places, giving them the air of shoes that had already experienced several lifetimes of Soviet life. Nevertheless, they were a match, and in the bleak landscape of Soviet footwear, that was enough. I bought them. I walked home, limping slightly but no longer feeling the shame of mismatched shoes. My babushka greeted me with raised eyebrows and a knowing smile. "Ah, a triumph," she said, though not without its quirks. The shoes lasted a surprisingly long time, considering their condition, but the next time they succumbed to the inevitable disintegration of Soviet-era footwear, the quest for a decent pair of matching shoes began again. This time, my strategy was different. I learned to exploit the system's flaws, befriended other frustrated shoe hunters. We shared tips, strategies. I learned that the best shoes weren't found in the state-run stores, but rather in the back alleys, in the hands of resourceful entrepreneurs who traded smuggled goods or those acquired through various back channels. A system of underground commerce as complex and thrilling as the Soviet bureaucracy itself. This was where the real shopping adventure began, a journey filled with risk, intrigue, and the possibility of acquiring a truly decent pair of matching shoes. The next pair I acquired involved a long, dark night in a bustling backstreet market where deals were whispered in hushed tones and quality was traded off against the risks of arrest. The shoes were beautiful, sturdy, well made, leather boots, smuggled in from somewhere beyond the Iron Curtain. They were even a near perfect match. The only problem was they were a size too small, leading to a series of hilarious yet excruciating episodes that would have made Chaplin proud. On another occasion, I struck a deal with a cobbler, a wizened old man who possessed the uncanny ability to mend shoes that even my babushka had considered beyond repair. He used materials acquired through equally dubious channels, but his craftsmanship was superb. He fashioned 2 shoes out of 4, the leather a hodgepodge of salvaged pieces, the final product a kind of surreal Frankensteinian masterpiece of footwear, testament to both his skills and the absurdity of the situation. The hunt for shoes became a recurring theme, a comic subplot to the larger drama of Soviet life, a constant reminder of the quirky and unexpected ways we adapted to a system that offered very little in the way of choice or quality. Each pair acquired was a small victory, a battle won in the endless war against shortages. They were, in a way, miniature works of art, crafted in response to scarcity, a reflection of the resourcefulness and resilience of a people accustomed to making do with less, much less, than the world deemed sufficient. So, the rhythm of shortages extended beyond bread. It permeated every aspect of daily life, from the mundane act of acquiring footwear to the grander political struggles. And yet, amidst this relentless scarcity, there was a strange and dark humor, a sense of collective absurdity that allowed us to laugh, however nervously, at the system's failures and our own creative responses. The mismatched shoes were a badge of honor, a symbol of survival in the face of utter chaos. They were a humorous yet tragic emblem of life in the Soviet Union, a constant comical reminder of a reality where even the simplest things required ingenuity, resilience, and a healthy dose of dark humor. The shoes, ultimately, were a testament to our resilience, our ability to find amusement in the face of adversity, to find humor in the struggle for the most basic necessities. They were a reflection of us, a reflection of a generation forced to adapt, to laugh in the face of absurdity, and to find meaning in the most unexpected of places, even in the most mismatched of shoes. And as long as there were queues, as long as there were shortages, as long as there was that constant underlying tension, so there would be stories, and so there would be laughter, bittersweet, darkly tinged laughter, a laugh that arose from the very fabric of Soviet existence. It was, after all, the only way to survive. The shoes, at least, were settled. A precarious peace had been brokered with my footwear situation, a truce forged in the fiery crucible of the Soviet shoe department. But the victory was short-lived, for a far greater challenge loomed, the refrigerator, or rather, the absence of a refrigerator. My current refrigeration solution involved a small battered icebox, a relic from a bygone era, a testament to my family's stubborn refusal to surrender to the utter hopelessness of the situation. It held perhaps a quart of milk, and if I was particularly skilled at Tetris-style packing, a couple of eggs. Anything beyond this risked a disastrous, milky, eggy avalanche. This wasn't simply inconvenient. It was a constant battle against spoilage and the gnawing fear of hunger. A proper refrigerator was not merely a convenience. It was a symbol of a life less precarious, a life less defined by constant, gnawing scarcity. Acquiring a refrigerator through official channels was, to put it mildly, a fool's errand. The appliance store, a monolithic structure of concrete and despair, sat on the edge of town, a monument to the Soviet Union's failure to provide even the most basic necessities to its citizens. It was a place of hushed whispers and resigned sighs where hope went to die, a slow, agonizing death amidst the drab displays of perpetually empty shelves. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of dust, disappointment, and the faint, lingering aroma of stale cabbage. The first step, as with the shoes, involved the dreaded voucher. This was no ordinary piece of paper. This was a sacred document, imbued with bureaucratic power, a passport to the land of cold milk and unwilted lettuce. Obtaining it required a pilgrimage to numerous offices, each one a potential obstacle, a hurdle to be jumped, a form to be filled, a stamp to be acquired. The quest involved hours of queuing, not the spirited, comradely queue for bread, but the long, slow, silent queue of quiet desperation. Each bureaucrat, a gatekeeper to this icy paradise, seemed to derive a strange satisfaction from the process of delay. They seemed to revel in the labyrinthine complexity of the system, their stamps wielded with the precision of a surgeon and the speed of a glacier. Their expressions were a masterpiece of bureaucratic indifference, an impenetrable mask of disinterest that hinted at deeper levels of weariness and barely contained exasperation. I learned to anticipate their responses, to prepare for the inevitable requests for further paperwork, the endless loops and dead ends inherent in this process of official denial. After weeks of bureaucratic maneuvering, I finally clutched the precious voucher, a small, crumpled square of paper that felt heavier than a lead weight. Armed with this symbol of bureaucratic achievement, I set off for the appliance store, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and apprehension. The store itself was a depressing spectacle. The shelves were largely bare. The few refrigerators on display were either dented, scratched, or simply broken. The air hung heavy with an air of defeated expectancy. The sales staff, a phalanx of weary-faced women, moved with the languid grace of sloths, their movements reflecting the general air of hopelessness. They seemed to be permanently resigned to the futility of their existence, the absurdity of their task. My voucher, presented with trembling hands, was met with the same disinterest shown to my mismatched shoes. Ah, yes, the saleswoman sighed. Refrigerators. We are expecting a shipment. Soon. Thank soon was the Soviet equivalent of never, a word that hung in the air like a shroud. This was not the end of the road, however. I had already spent too much time and effort on this undertaking. My determination had transformed itself into a kind of grim, obsessive perseverance, an almost manic pursuit of the elusive refrigerator. I began to employ more unconventional strategies. First, I struck up a friendship with the store manager, a burly man with a perpetually unhappy expression. I brought him cigarettes, a precious commodity, and I listened patiently to his complaints about the system, about his wife, about the lack of decent vodka. Slowly, through careful manipulation of his mood with judicious flattery and supplies of contraband tobacco, I acquired some inside knowledge. Then came the black market. Here, the transactions occurred in hushed tones, in dimly lit back alleys, a world of shadowy figures, hushed whispers, and deals conducted under the cloak of darkness. I encountered a variety of refrigerators, each with its own unique history and set of problems. Some were smuggled from abroad, others were salvaged from abandoned collective farms, and some were simply cobbled together from parts. The prices were extortionate, of course, but they paled in comparison to the value of a functioning refrigerator in a land of constant spoilage. But even the black market failed me. The deal fell through at the last minute, the seller vanishing into the night, leaving me once again empty handed. My final approach was the most audacious and possibly the most effective. I presented the store manager with a small package, a little gift of gratitude, if you will. It was a small but strategically placed bribe, a small token of appreciation for his time, his understanding, and his patience. This was a highly risky move, since such actions could easily land one in trouble with the authorities. But in the Soviet system, it was a universally understood unspoken tactic for circumventing its many flaws. The consequences of failure were minimal compared to the benefits of success. He looked at the package, then at me, his expression unreadable. He sighed, then smiled, a slow, almost imperceptible change of expression that gave away his consent. Within a week, a gleaming, slightly dented refrigerator, a second-hand miracle, was sitting proudly in my kitchen. It wasn't the newest, nor the shiniest, but it worked. It hummed with a satisfying, comforting regularity that filled me with a deep sense of contentment. The cold, sterile hum was a symphony of relief, a testament to the absurd lengths one had to go to in order to survive. The rhythm of shortages, that was the soundtrack of Soviet life. But there were moments, fleeting moments of triumph amidst the relentless beat of scarcity. And just occasionally, there was that satisfying humming quiet of the refrigerator doing its silent, vital job. The refrigerator was a symbol of perseverance and resilience. It was a small, quiet victory in an era of perpetual scarcity, a tiny beacon of hope in a world of constant darkness. And that, my friends, was worth far more than any price. The refrigerator, a dented testament to my persistence, hummed a contented tune, a stark contrast to the cacophony of malfunctioning appliances that populated my cramped apartment. My kitchen, a battlefield of domestic warfare, was where the true art of gentle persuasion with appliances was honed. It wasn't enough to simply own a washing machine. One had to negotiate with it. My washing machine, a monstrous gray behemoth of Soviet engineering, possessed a temperament as unpredictable as the weather in Siberia. It would churn and churn, its motor emitting a sound like a wounded walrus, only to abruptly shudder to a halt mid-cycle, leaving my laundry sodden and smelling vaguely of despair. Repairing it was an exercise in futility. Spare parts were as elusive as a unicorn in a Moscow park. Therefore, alternative methods were required. My first technique involved what I called rhythmic encouragement. This involved a combination of strategically placed taps, persuasive verbal exhortations. I'd found that a stern tone worked best, and the occasional well-aimed kick. It was a delicate dance, a ballet of brute force and whispered pleas, a performance art only a seasoned Soviet citizen could fully appreciate. Sometimes, a spirited rendition of a folk song, sung off-key and at the top of my lungs, would prove surprisingly effective. The machine, seemingly charmed by my vocal acrobatics, would often resume its cycle with a grateful gurgle. The iron, a temperamental device, was another matter entirely. It had a tendency to either produce a scorching, fabric-destroying heat, or equally disastrously, no heat whatsoever. The dial, a dial of mystery and perpetual uncertainty, was utterly unreliable. I learned to gauge its mood, much like a seasoned weather forecaster interpreting cloud formations. A slight hiss, a tentative glow, suggested it might be cooperative. A silence, however, portended disaster. My approach to the iron involved a mixture of cajoling and intimidation. I'd start with gentle pats, murmuring words of encouragement, occasionally spraying it with a fine mist of water, a technique learned from an elderly woman in my building who claimed to possess a deep understanding of the iron's emotional needs. If this failed, more forceful measures were needed. I'd unplug it, let it cool, then firmly but respectfully scold it. The scolding always had to be well reasoned. Merely shouting would only increase its recalcitrance. My approach was always methodical and firm. The toaster, a small chrome relic from a forgotten age, presented a unique set of challenges. It had a habit of sparking violently, occasionally emitting a small plume of smoke, and frequently refusing to toast bread evenly. To coax it into action required a combination of patience, precise timing, and a healthy dose of superstition. I found that chanting a series of incantations, borrowed from an old woman selling herbal remedies in the market, seemed to improve its performance. I'd murmur the incantations while simultaneously jiggling the power cord and carefully adjusting the dial. The success rate of this method was admittedly erratic, but it added a certain theatrical flair to my morning routine. More often than not, it produced a bizarrely toasted slice of bread, one half black as coal and the other stubbornly pale, but it was bread nonetheless. The most challenging of all my appliances, however, was the electric kettle. This rather pathetic excuse for a kettle would routinely sputter, splutter, and refuse to boil water. My solution involved a detailed ritual that involved a careful cleaning of its internal components with a toothbrush, a scarcity in itself, making each cleaning ritual feel like a rare and expensive spa treatment, followed by a series of rigorous electrical tests and a final, almost apologetic, plug-in. The success of these methods was always uncertain, yet it was all part of life's rhythm in the Soviet Union. The daily struggle to coax functionality from these temperamental devices became a perverse form of entertainment. It was a testament to human ingenuity and a sharp reminder of the limitations of the planned economy. These battered and unreliable appliances, symbols of Soviet industrial ineptitude, simultaneously mocked and challenged our resourcefulness. They were a constant source of frustration and humor, intertwined as they were in the fabric of daily life. The constant battle with appliances often ended with a burst of laughter, shared with friends who faced the same daily struggles. The Soviet kitchen, while far from the ideal domestic space, became a crucible of camaraderie, where the shared frustration of dealing with temperamental machinery served to draw people together, forging bonds of kinship. We laughed, sharing stories and tips. Sometimes a useful piece of advice or spare part would emerge. The rhythm of shortages was relentless, a perpetual undercurrent to daily life, but within it there were small triumphs, small moments of satisfaction, like the triumphant hiss of the iron as it finally heated up, or the satisfying click of the toaster's switch. It wasn't simply about the functioning of the appliances, it was about the resilience and humor that came with managing them. It was the art of Soviet resourcefulness, the art of making do, making use of whatever resources were available to you. This was also a part of Soviet life, not just the rhythm of shortages, but the ingenuity used to cope with them. The communal kitchen was a different beast altogether. Forget the cozy domestic ideal. This was a battlefield, a daily clash of culinary cultures and clashing personalities waged amidst chipped formica countertops and the ever present aroma of cabbage soup. It wasn't merely a kitchen, it was a microcosm of Soviet society, a compressed, highly volatile version of the larger social experiment unfolding outside our building's walls. Our kitchen, shared by 8 families, was a symphony of chaos. The air hung thick with the scent of boiling potatoes, frying onions, and a peculiar, indefinable odor that I suspected was a mixture of desperation and stale bread. Every surface was perpetually cluttered. Chipped enamel bowls jostled for space with mismatched pots and pans, all vying for attention on a stovetop that seemed to have seen better decades. There was Madame Petrov, a formidable woman with a perpetually disapproving frown and a cooking style that bordered on the aggressive. Her borscht, a legendary concoction of dubious ingredients and questionable hygiene practices, was a constant source of both fear and fascination. The rumor was that she used a secret family recipe passed down through generations that involved a pinch of something vaguely resembling, well, let's just say it wasn't listed in any standard cookbook. Her kitchen regime was equally formidable, a meticulously planned schedule that rotated days and times across all residents, with penalties for delays. Then there was young Anya, a perpetually flustered student whose culinary endeavors were more akin to controlled explosions than carefully planned meals. Her attempts at pancakes resembled irregular, burnt hockey pucks, and her attempts at making tea resulted in a volcanic eruption of spilled water and scalding steam. But Anya always greeted you with a smile, if not successful meals. Opposite Anya lived elderly Mr. Ivanovich, a man of simple tastes and even simpler cooking methods. His culinary repertoire consisted primarily of boiled potatoes, occasionally spiced with a lonely, forgotten onion. He treated the kitchen with the utmost reverence, wiping down his space after each use, even if a crumb remained. He was the epitome of quiet efficiency. The kitchen itself was a relic of a bygone era, a monument to Soviet practicality, or perhaps a lack thereof. The appliances, predictably, were temperamental. The oven, a temperamental giant, had a mind of its own. 1 minute it would be roaring with an intense heat, capable of turning a perfectly good roast into a charcoal briquette. The next it would be as cold as a Siberian winter. The refrigerator, a constant battleground of territorial disputes over shelf space, was a source of endless drama. The fight for refrigerator space was a silent, ongoing war. It was a place where strategic placement was paramount, where the early bird, or more accurately, the early riser, got the worm, or more accurately, the prime real estate for storing one's prized pickles. One morning, I found my meager supply of kefir inexplicably relocated to the back, almost lost amongst a sea of mysteriously pungent pickles belonging to Madame Petrov. Even the sink, a seemingly innocuous fixture, became a source of contention. Leaving a dirty dish, even for a few moments, was a social transgression of the highest order. Verbal skirmishes frequently erupted over the cleanliness standards, which varied wildly, as did the availability of hot water. However, amidst this chaos, a strange form of camaraderie arose. The shared struggle over burnt pancakes, spilled milk, and the eternally insufficient supply of hot water somehow forged an unlikely bond amongst us. We'd share stories, commiserate over burnt dishes, and trade tips on how to coax a little more life out of the dilapidated appliances. One evening, Anya's experimental casserole, a molten concoction that resembled a particularly unpleasant volcanic eruption, became the subject of much laughter and shared sympathy. Madame Petrov, surprisingly, offered a suggestion, a dash of her secret ingredient. We still don't know what it was, which inexplicably improved the dish. The communal kitchen became a melting pot of culinary disasters, near misses, and unexpected triumphs. It was a microcosm of our lives in the Soviet Union, chaotic, unpredictable, occasionally frustrating, but often surprisingly rewarding. It was a place where we learned to share, to compromise, and above all to laugh in the face of adversity, usually in the form of a badly burnt potato or a lukewarm cup of tea. There was a shared understanding, a silent pact of tolerance. We knew that the kitchen was not just a place to prepare food, but a space for communal interactions, a stage for drama, both culinary and interpersonal. We learned to navigate the unwritten rules and customs of this strange social arena. We learned to anticipate our neighbors' cooking schedules, to strategically place our own supplies, and to tolerate, even embrace, the occasional culinary disaster. We mastered the art of diplomacy, subtly negotiating for coveted shelf space or countertop area with a polite but firm approach. We discovered that a simple, heartfelt offering of bread or a homemade jam could grease the wheels of social harmony and perhaps even secure some preferential treatment. In the communal kitchen, we lived out the Soviet ideal of shared living, even if it was messier and more humorous than anyone had initially anticipated. The rhythm of shortages continued, the appliances stubbornly refused to cooperate, and the personalities inevitably clashed. Yet within this chaos, a unique form of kinship emerged, born from shared experiences and a collective struggle to make do with what little we had. It wasn't pretty, but it was uniquely Soviet. It was our life, and we wouldn't have had it any other way. The communal kitchen was our shared crucible, our laughter, our tears, and our surprisingly palatable, occasionally questionable meals all came from that one shared space. The smiles on the posters were unsettlingly perfect, a chilling uniformity that belied the gnawing anxieties simmering beneath the surface of Soviet life. Everywhere you looked, they were there, on billboards towering over grimy streets, plastered on the walls of factory that reeked of oil and sweat, even tucked into the cramped corners of the metro, where their cheerful faces seemed to mock the weary commuters jostling for space. These weren't just smiles, they were a carefully orchestrated performance, a visual mantra designed to instill a sense of unwavering optimism, of boundless progress in a society that often felt anything but. They were the smiles of workers, their faces etched with an impossible blend of joy and dedication. Muscled men, their brows furrowed in concentration, yet somehow managing to radiate pure contentment as they wielded hammers and wrenches. Women, their hair neatly tied back, beams of pure satisfaction lighting up their features as they assembled tractors or tended to crops. Each face, meticulously rendered, a testament to the power of artistic propaganda, conveyed an unwavering belief in the Soviet project, a belief that felt increasingly tenuous as the years trudged on. One particular poster that haunted my memory depicted a family, A father, mother, and two children gathered around a lavishly laden table, overflowing with fruits and vegetables that seemed to shimmer with an almost unnatural vibrancy. The children's smiles were wide and unnaturally bright, their eyes sparkling with a joy that felt manufactured, almost staged. The father, a robust figure in a crisp worker's uniform, beamed with paternal pride, his hand resting reassuringly on his wife's shoulder. She, in turn, radiated a maternal warmth that seemed out of sync with the harsh realities of motherhood in our time, a time when obtaining even the most basic necessities was a daily struggle. The reality, of course, was starkly different. Our own family table rarely boasted such abundance. Our meals were more akin to a Spartan exercise in resourcefulness, a carefully calculated rationing of meager supplies. The abundance depicted in that poster felt like a cruel joke, a pointed reminder of our collective deprivation. I remember my mother, her face etched with weariness far beyond her years, trying to make sense of the disparity, often sighing quietly at the table, her expression a stark contrast to the unwavering joy of the poster woman. This juxtaposition, this constant disparity between the idealistic propaganda and the quotidian struggles, permeated every aspect of our lives. In the metro, the posters heralded the achievements of the Soviet Union, the progress in industry, the advancements in science, the rise of a new socialist man. Yet the actual experience of the metro was anything but triumphant. It was a crowded, claustrophobic purgatory where the air hung thick with the smell of sweat, stale bread, and unfulfilled hopes. The carriages were always overcrowded, a sea of tired faces, each reflecting the fatigue of a long day's work. The streets weren't much better. The grand boulevards depicted in the posters, lined with impeccably maintained buildings and cheerful pedestrians, were overshadowed by potholed roads, crumbling facades, and the constant threat of encountering a stray dog or encountering an unscheduled maintenance work. The pristine public parks, promised havens of leisure and recreation, were often overgrown and neglected, their playgrounds dilapidated and dangerous. The promised utopia was clearly still under construction, and the construction seemed to be perpetually behind schedule. Even the news reports, meticulously crafted narratives of national progress, couldn't hide the underlying tensions and contradictions. While the newsreaders intoned pronouncements of economic growth and social harmony, the whispered conversations in the communal kitchens painted a much bleaker picture. The shortage of basic goods, the constant queuing for necessities, the unspoken anxieties about the future, these were the realities that defined our lives, realities that the state-controlled media diligently avoided. And then there were the murals, these larger-than-life depictions of heroic workers and triumphant battles painted on the facades of buildings across the city, served as a constant reminder of the idealized Soviet citizen. These painted figures, with their determined expressions and unwavering optimism, stood in stark contrast to the weary faces I saw every day. The murals represented a glorious past and an inevitable future. Both were at odds with my present. I remember one mural in particular, depicting a collective farm worker proudly holding aloft a massive sheaf of wheat. The worker's smile was broad and radiant, a symbol of the agricultural abundance promised by the Communist Party. Yet the reality was that the collective farms often struggled to meet their quotas, resulting in shortages of bread and other essential foodstuffs. The mural was a poignant reminder of the gulf between the official narrative and the lived experience. The smiles on the posters weren't simply a form of artistic expression, they were a crucial element of the Soviet propaganda machine, designed to reinforce a sense of collective identity and unwavering faith in the regime. But the incongruity between the idealized imagery and the harsh realities of daily life created a profound sense of cognitive dissonance, a gap between what was being presented and what was actually experienced. This gap, this ever present disconnect, fostered a cynicism that permeated every layer of Soviet society. A quiet rebellion played out in the hushed conversations, the shared knowing glances, and the wry smiles that sometimes flickered across the faces of the people I knew. Smiles that were far more genuine, far more complex than the perfectly crafted ones adorning the ubiquitous posters. Those smiles in the posters were a performance. Ours were a quiet act of defiance. The smiles on the posters reflected a carefully constructed fantasy. The smiles on our faces told a different story altogether, a story of quiet resilience, of resourceful adaptation, and of a deep-seated skepticism that ran far deeper than any propaganda could ever reach. The pervasive optimism projected through the posters often felt like a mockery of the lived reality. It served as a stark reminder of the immense gulf that separated the official narrative from the daily struggles of ordinary citizens. The propaganda, however effective in its own way, ultimately became a tool for highlighting the regime's failings. The more relentlessly the government promoted its vision of a prosperous and happy society, the more glaring became the discrepancies between the picture painted in the posters and the reality on the ground. The disconnect, however, wasn't always received with outright rebellion. Many adapted, learning to navigate the complexities of life under a regime where words and images often bore little resemblance to reality. This involved a deft dance between compliance and subtle resistance, where a silent understanding was shared among the populace, an unspoken pact acknowledging the falsehoods of the official story without directly challenging the authorities. The sheer volume of propaganda, however, eventually led to a form of ironic acceptance. The posters, murals, and news reports became an amusing background hum to the daily grind, a kind of absurdist theater played out against the backdrop of hardship and uncertainty. Laughter, often tinged with bitterness, became a coping mechanism, a way to process the incongruity between the official narrative and the lived experience. It was a way of reclaiming a sense of agency in the face of overwhelming state control, turning the potent symbols of propaganda into tools for satire and subversion. The smiles on those posters, then, were more than just a symbol of manufactured happiness. They became a subject of conversation, a source of jokes and shared ironic observations, and ultimately a testament to the resilience and wit of the Soviet people who managed to find humor in the face of adversity, even in the teeth of ubiquitous, blatant lies. Their perfectly formed smiles, devoid of any hint of true emotion, eventually became a symbol of the pervasive disconnect between the official vision and the lived experience, a poignant reminder of the power of propaganda and the resilience of the human spirit in defying it. The air in the hall hung thick, a miasma of stale cigarette smoke and suppressed sighs. Rows of folding chairs, the kind that pinched your thighs and left you with a numb bottom after an hour, stretched towards a small raised platform. This wasn't a concert hall, nor a theater. This was the arena for mandatory optimism, the weekly dose of state sanctioned cheerfulness. Every Tuesday, like clockwork, we shuffled in, weary workers, harried mothers, disgruntled students, all compelled to participate in this ritual of enforced enthusiasm. The speaker, a man whose face was as pale and lifeless as the plaster walls, droned on about the unprecedented successes of the 5-year plan. His voice, amplified through a crackling loudspeaker, echoed the hollow pronouncements we'd heard countless times before. We were told about the record harvests, the booming industrial output, the unwavering progress towards a brighter future. Each statistic, each carefully chosen phrase, was designed to elicit a surge of national pride, a collective feeling of unwavering belief in the party's vision. But the reality was far removed from the speaker's carefully crafted narrative. The record harvests? Our meager rations suggested otherwise. The booming industrial output, the long lines outside the stores, snaking around the block for a loaf of bread or a kilogram of sugar, painted us a different picture. The brighter future, the future for many of us, seemed to stretch before us as a never-ending queue, a never-ending wait for something that may never come. The smiles, the obligatory smiles plastered on our faces, felt like grotesque masks straining against that underlying current of weariness and disillusionment. We were experts at this charade, adept at maintaining the outward semblance of unwavering support while privately questioning everything. Our smiles were the smiles of survival, a silent acknowledgement of the game we were forced to play. I remember one particularly memorable Tuesday. The speaker, a particularly fervent young man with a comb-over that defied gravity, launched into an impassioned speech about the glories of collective farming. He painted a rosy picture of contented farmers, their faces beaming with joy as they harvested record crops. He spoke of tractors that hummed with efficiency, of fields that yielded bountiful harvests under the watchful eye of the party. A woman sitting near me, a stooped figure with calloused hands and eyes that held the weight of 1,000 unspoken sorrows, let out a barely audible sigh. It was a sound that perfectly encapsulated the silent dissent that simmered beneath the surface of the meeting. It was a sound that in its quiet desperation spoke volumes. The speaker, oblivious to her silent rebellion, continued his enthusiastic rant, completely unaware of the cynicism that hung heavy in the air. Another time, the meeting was interrupted by a power failure. The lights flickered and died, plunging the hall into sudden darkness. For a moment, there was silence, a pregnant silence broken only by the nervous rustling of chairs and the occasional whispered comment. Then, a ripple of laughter spread through the room, a wave of shared understanding washing over the rows of weary faces. In that brief moment of darkness, the facade of forced optimism crumbled, revealing the shared cynicism that bound us together. The laughter wasn't derisive, but rather a release of tension, a shared acknowledgement of the absurdity of the situation. In the darkness, we were momentarily free from the scrutiny of the party, free to share a brief moment of genuine connection, a silent rebellion against the relentless pressure to conform. When the lights flickered back on, the smiles returned, but they were different now, imbued with a subtle hint of knowing complicity. The meetings were a strange performance, a theater of the absurd played out on a stage of folding chairs. The speaker, a puppet of the state, spouted empty platitudes, while the audience, a collection of weary souls, silently registered the discrepancy between words and reality. The dissonance was palpable, a silent tension that crackled in the air. One recurring theme in these meetings was the enemy. The enemy was always lurking, a shadowy figure threatening the progress of the Soviet Union. Sometimes it was the capitalists scheming to undermine our achievements. Other times it was the spies infiltrating our society and sowing seeds of discord. And occasionally it was even our own citizens, their minds poisoned by subversive ideas. This constant portrayal of an external enemy, a scapegoat for all that went wrong, served to reinforce the regime's authority and consolidate power. But the audience, having witnessed the everyday realities of shortages, rationing, and bureaucratic incompetence, saw through the propaganda. The enemy was conveniently always external, never internal. The system itself remained untouchable. The humor, of course, was found in the incongruity between the speaker's pronouncements and the unspoken realities of our lives. The gap between official rhetoric and lived experience was so vast, so fundamentally at odds, that it became a source of dark comedy. The jokes were whispered, shared in hushed tones during the coffee breaks, a subtle form of defiance against the oppressive weight of propaganda. These mandatory meetings became then not just an exercise in political indoctrination, but a bizarre form of collective therapy, a shared experience that bound us together in our collective disillusionment. We were united not in our faith in the regime, but in our shared understanding of its hollowness. Our laughter was a silent protest, a way of reclaiming our sense of humanity in the face of relentless state control. We were trapped in a performance, forced to participate in a theater of the absurd, but even in that confinement, we found ways to connect, to laugh, and to silently rebel. The smiles on our faces were no longer expressions of unwavering support, but a quiet form of resistance, a recognition of the absurdity of the entire situation, a shared secret joke whispered in a room filled with lies. The meeting hall, with its stark utilitarian furnishings, became a silent testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to find humor, even in the face of overwhelming despair. The mandatory optimism meetings were a ritual, yes, but also a darkly comic spectacle, a reminder of the inherent contradictions at the heart of the Soviet system, and a quiet celebration of the enduring resilience of the human spirit. The perfectly crafted smiles of the posters, they were nothing compared to the quiet, knowing smiles exchanged in the shadows of that meeting hall. The 5-year plan, on paper, was a symphony of efficiency, a meticulously orchestrated ballet of production and distribution designed to propel the Soviet Union to industrial might. In reality, it played out more like a drunken polka, chaotic and unpredictable, with a distinct lack of grace. The ambitious targets, set with the precision of a surgeon, often landed with the accuracy of a drunkard's throw. Take, for instance, the great shoe shortage of '48. The plan called for an unprecedented surge in footwear production, aiming to outfit every citizen with sturdy, reliable boots. The quotas were ambitious, the targets audacious. What the planners failed to account for, however, was the human element, the unpredictable nature of human desire. The factories, tasked with meeting these lofty goals, churned out millions of pairs of shoes, Yes, but mostly size 42. Size 42 boots for everyone. Picture, if you will, the absurdity. Diminutive babushkas struggling to waddle in monstrous boots, toddlers tripping over oversized footwear, and burly factory workers complaining of cramped toes. The market was flooded with size 42 boots, a surplus so vast it overflowed warehouses and created an unintended consequence, a desperate need for smaller sizes, creating a secondary, even more problematic shortage. The problem wasn't merely a lack of foresight, it was a fundamental misunderstanding of consumer needs. The centralized planning system, so obsessed with its macro level targets, completely overlooked the micro level realities. The planners, sitting in their ivory towers, were disconnected from the everyday lives of ordinary citizens, oblivious to the diversity of foot sizes, the nuanced demands of a varied population. Their world was one of abstract numbers, of production quotas and projected outputs. The messy complexities of the real world were deemed irrelevant. This wasn't an isolated incident. The same logic, or rather the lack thereof, played out across various sectors of the economy. The agricultural sector, for example, suffered from a similar disconnect. The planners, determined to boost grain production, set targets that disregarded the realities of soil quality, climate variations, and local agricultural expertise. Collective farms, stripped of their autonomy, were forced to cultivate crops unsuitable for their land, leading to widespread crop failures and chronic food shortages. The result? The paradox of plenty and famine coexisting, overflowing granaries with the wrong kind of grain while people starved for bread. I remember visiting a collective farm near my hometown. The fields, supposedly a testament to the successes of the 5-year plan, were a patchwork of withered stalks and barren soil. The tractors, hailed as symbols of progress, stood rusting in the fields, their engines choked with dust and despair. The farmers, their faces etched with exhaustion and resentment, told tales of broken machinery, inadequate supplies, and unrealistic quotas. They spoke of a system that demanded absolute obedience but offered little in return. Their quiet rebellion was evident in the half-hearted efforts, the subtle acts of sabotage that ensured their own survival rather than fulfilling the impossible demands of the plan. The impact extended far beyond agriculture and footwear. The construction of industrial complexes often proceeded without proper planning, infrastructure, or skilled labor. Factories sprang up in locations ill-suited for their purpose, creating logistical nightmares and further hindering the production process. The result was often a spectacle of half-finished buildings, abandoned projects, and an overall inefficiency that undermined the very goals the plan intended to achieve. And then there were the unintended consequences, the ripple effects that spread throughout the economy like a virus. For example, the overproduction of one good often led to the underproduction of another. The concentration of resources in certain sectors meant others suffered neglect. Priorities shifted haphazardly, driven by the whims of central planners, rather than responding to the actual needs of the population. I recall a particularly memorable trip to a local department store. It was a depressing affair. Shelves were half empty, displays were sparsely populated, and the few items on offer were overpriced and often of poor quality. The lines, as always, were interminable. We queued for hours, waiting for things that were often unavailable, enduring the monotony of waiting, the silent resentment brewing in the air. Meanwhile, the official reports declared a booming consumer market, overflowing with goods, a clear demonstration of the success of the 5-year plans. The humor, as always, lay in the juxtaposition of these official pronouncements and the stark reality. The gap between words and reality was so vast, it created a landscape of dark irony, a comedic absurdity that only a Soviet citizen could appreciate. There was a cynical understanding among us. The official pronouncements were lies, but they were lies that needed to be repeated, lies we needed to accept. And so we laughed privately at the absurdity of it all, a shared laughter born from a deep-seated understanding of the ridiculousness of the system. We found humor in the incongruities, in the sheer ineptitude of the plans, in the desperate attempts to maintain a facade of success. Our laughter was a silent rebellion, a way of acknowledging the shared absurdity of a situation we couldn't control. It was an act of defiance, a way of maintaining sanity in the face of a system designed to erode it. The 5-year plans, with their ambitious goals and disastrous outcomes, became a running joke among us. They were a constant reminder of the folly of centralized planning, the inherent limitations of a system that attempted to control every aspect of human life. The plans were grandiose in conception, but ultimately they failed because they didn't account for one key ingredient: humanity. The human spirit in its resilience, its capacity for ingenuity, its ability to laugh in the face of adversity, proved to be far more powerful than any 5-year plan. The unintended consequence of the plan: a generation that learned to laugh in the face of impossible odds, a generation with a dark sense of humor and a deep understanding of how absurd life can be under the iron fist of a central planning regime. The laughter, therefore, was not simply a coping mechanism, but a quiet form of resistance, a testament to human spirit that persisted even in the bleakest of times. The air crackled with forced enthusiasm. Red banners, crisp and new, flapped defiantly in the chilly October wind, their slogans: "Glory to the workers," "Fulfillment of the 5-year plan," echoing the shrill pronouncements of the loudspeaker. It was the annual Harvest Festival, a meticulously orchestrated display of Soviet agricultural prowess. Or so the official propaganda would have you believe. I stood amidst the throng, a sea of identical gray overcoats punctuated by the vibrant red of the banners, a sardonic smile playing on my lips. The stage was set, a hastily constructed platform adorned with sheaves of wheat, impossibly plump and golden, strategically positioned to hide the sparsely populated field behind it. The speeches began, a cascade of hyperbolic pronouncements, each one more ludicrous than the last. The regional party secretary, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with a look of strained cheerfulness, boasted of record-breaking harvests, of bountiful yields that would feed the nation for years to come. He spoke of tractors humming with efficiency, of collective farmers working in harmonious unity, of a golden age of agricultural abundance. The reality, as we all knew, was far less glamorous. The bountiful harvest had been, in truth, a meager one, barely enough to sustain the local population. The tractors, often temperamental beasts, prone to breakdowns, spent more time in the repair shop than in the fields. The harmonious unity of the collective farmers was a myth, masked by a veneer of forced camaraderie. Backbreaking labor, meager rations, and the ever-present threat of the NKVD kept them in line. The most comical aspect, perhaps, was the display of prize winning vegetables. Gigantic cabbages, monstrous carrots, and impossibly symmetrical pumpkins, all of improbable size and perfection, sat on display like trophies from some bizarre horticultural competition. I knew, from personal experience, that these weren't the products of diligent farming, but rather carefully selected specimens, painstakingly cultivated in hothouses and then paraded as evidence of collective farming's success. They were carefully curated lies, presented with an almost theatrical flourish. Later that evening, the celebrations continued at the local factory. This time, it was a celebration of exceeding production quotas in the manufacture of shoe polish. Yes, shoe polish. Millions of tins of shoe polish, enough to shine every pair of size 42 boots in the country several times over. The workers, their faces smeared with the very product they had supposedly overproduced, were awarded medals and certificates, their smiles as strained as the party secretaries. They chanted slogans, clapped politely, and looked generally miserable. The irony wasn't lost on me. We celebrated the abundance of shoe polish while struggling to find bread. We lauded the exceeding of quotas while facing constant shortages of basic necessities. We praised the success of the plan while living amidst its failures. The official narrative presented a picture of prosperity, of unparalleled progress. Our lived reality, however, offered a different story. These celebrations weren't merely empty gestures, they were crucial elements in the machinery of propaganda. They were intended to reinforce the official narrative, to create a sense of shared purpose, to stifle dissent. The carefully constructed illusion of success was essential to maintaining the facade of the Soviet system. I remember another celebration, a May Day parade in Moscow. The scale was breathtaking, thousands upon thousands of people marching in perfect formation, waving flags, their faces etched with a mixture of pride and apprehension. The sheer spectacle was impressive, even intimidating. The tanks rumbled past, their treads crushing the cobblestones, a symbol of Soviet military might. The planes soared overhead, leaving trails of smoke in the sky, creating a dramatic spectacle designed to instill awe and obedience. Yet amidst this orchestrated display of national pride, I couldn't help but notice the subtle signs of unease, the forced smiles, the lackluster applause, the glint of cynicism in the eyes of the onlookers. The parade was a theatrical performance, a carefully crafted illusion designed to mask the underlying reality of hardship, oppression, and fear. The carefully scripted speeches praised the successes of the Soviet system, while ignoring the pervasive poverty and shortages. These celebrations served a dual purpose. They were not merely displays of contrived success, they were instruments of social control. By participating in these events, citizens were, in a sense, forced to endorse the official narrative, to acknowledge the claimed accomplishments of the regime, regardless of whether they were true. Refusal to participate, or even a hint of skepticism, could have grave consequences. The celebratory atmosphere, therefore, was a thinly veiled form of coercion. The paradox was striking. We celebrated achievements that were often fictitious, while simultaneously enduring a life characterized by hardship and scarcity. We were forced to participate in a grand charade, playing our parts in a theater of the absurd. Our laughter, however, was a silent rebellion. It was a way of acknowledging the absurdity of the situation, a way of maintaining our sanity in the face of impossible odds. I recall one particular factory award ceremony. The factory, a producer of allegedly superior tractors, was being lauded for its remarkable contributions to the 5-year plan. The awards were presented with great fanfare. The speeches were long and tedious, praising the workers' dedication and loyalty. Yet as the ceremony progressed, I noticed a growing sense of unease amongst the attendees. Whispers circulated among the crowd. Rumors surfaced regarding the shoddy craftsmanship of the tractors, of frequent breakdowns, and of the extensive backlog of repairs. The workers, their faces betraying a mixture of pride and resentment, exchanged knowing glances. The official narrative, so carefully constructed, began to unravel. The humor in that instance arose not from the absurdity of the situation, but from the shared understanding of its falsity. We knew that the awards were hollow, the accolades undeserved. The smiles were strained, the applause hesitant. The celebration was a grotesque parody of success. And so it went, year after year. The parades, the festivals, the factory award ceremonies, all orchestrated displays of manufactured enthusiasm. We celebrated successes that never materialized, achievements that were fabricated, and progress that was illusory. The system thrived on this dissonance, on the constant gap between official pronouncements and lived reality. The laughter then became a coping mechanism, a form of quiet resistance in a world where genuine celebration was a rare commodity. Our shared cynicism became a strange bond, a shared understanding of the theatrical nature of our existence under the iron fist of the Soviet system. The absurdity of it all, in retrospect, was almost comical. A dark, Soviet-style farce played out on the grand stage of history. The official pronouncements echoed through the loudspeaker, a relentless barrage of optimistic statistics and patriotic fervor, but the real life of Moscow unfolded in the hushed corners and shadowed alleyways, far removed from the brightly lit stages of the official celebrations. It was in these less visible spaces that the quiet acts of resistance played out, a subtle counterpoint to the grand, orchestrated displays of Soviet might. Take, for instance, the bustling black market that thrived just beyond the watchful eyes of the militia. It wasn't a formal marketplace, not at all. Instead, it was a network of whispered conversations, furtive exchanges, and carefully concealed transactions. Grandma Anya, a woman whose wrinkled face spoke of a life lived under the ever-present gaze of the state, was its queen. Her apartment, a modest space cluttered with mismatched furniture and the scent of pickled cucumbers, served as a hub for this clandestine commerce. Here, amidst the carefully stacked jars of homemade preserves and sacks of potatoes procured through dubious channels, the true economy of Moscow flourished. People bartered goods and services in a silent rebellion against the official rationing system. A few ounces of good coffee traded for a pair of worn-out boots. A length of fine fabric, smuggled from a distant factory, exchanged for a month's supply of decent bread. The currency wasn't rubles, but rather ingenuity, trust, and a shared understanding of the system's inherent failures. This wasn't just about acquiring goods. It was about circumventing the state's control, a small act of defiance played out in the quiet intimacy of a shared kitchen. Then there were the fixers, individuals with a knack for navigating the labyrinthine bureaucracy. They were masters of improvisation, adept at finding creative loopholes within the rigid system. They could acquire a building permit for a non existent structure, secure scarce materials for a private construction project, or even obtain a coveted travel visa that would have been impossible to obtain through official channels. Their expertise was highly prized, their fees paid in kind, and their methods were often ingenious, bordering on the miraculous. They operated in the gray areas, the spaces between official rules and practical realities, their existence a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming oppression. Workplaces, too, became theaters of quiet resistance. The official production quotas, those ambitious targets constantly touted in the propaganda machine, were often met with creative accounting and strategic slacking. The workers, well aware that the quality of their output far surpassed the demands of the plan, found ways to slow down the pace of production, diverting resources towards projects of personal value. A perfectly crafted cabinet for a friend's apartment, a hidden stockpile of spare parts destined for private repairs, or even the judicious allocation of surplus material for personal use, were all quiet acts of reclamation in the face of a system that sought to control every aspect of their lives. This wasn't passive resistance, it was active, creative subversion. It was a way of reclaiming control over one's life, however small that control might be. A pair of sturdy boots, secretly crafted from superior leather, represented more than just footwear. It was a symbol of individual skill and a quiet rejection of the shoddy, mass produced goods foisted upon them. A carefully nurtured vegetable garden, hidden behind the crumbling brick walls of an apartment building, represented a quiet defiance of the state controlled collective farms. The shared recipes and culinary secrets passed down through generations weren't just about food, they were a way of preserving cultural heritage in the face of the official drive for homogenization. Humor played a vital role in this quiet resistance. Jokes circulated in hushed whispers became potent weapons against the monolithic ideology of the state. They mocked the absurdities of the system, highlighting the hypocrisy and contradictions that lay at the heart of the Soviet project. These jokes, often subversive and daring, allowed people to share their feelings of frustration and anger, creating a sense of solidarity against a common enemy, the system itself. The laughter, often shared in the secrecy of smoke-filled rooms, became a small act of defiance, a way of reclaiming some measure of personal freedom in a world where laughter itself was often controlled. Even the seemingly mundane act of sharing a meal became an act of rebellion. The scarcity of food meant that even the simplest meal was a shared experience, an affirmation of community and resilience. A humble bowl of borscht, shared among friends in a dimly lit kitchen, became a symbol of resistance against the official narrative of abundance. The recipes were not just instructions, they were a living legacy, passed down through generations, an affirmation of a culture that refused to be erased. The quiet acts of resistance were not grand gestures, not dramatic displays of defiance. They were the small, everyday choices that individuals made to reclaim some measure of autonomy in a system designed to control every aspect of their lives. They were acts of individual resilience, a testament to the enduring human spirit's ability to survive and even thrive under the most oppressive of circumstances. They were the unsung stories of a nation grappling with the realities of Soviet life, shaping their experiences through humor, resourcefulness, and quiet acts of subversion. And in the shared whispers, in the furtive glances, in the laughter shared in the shadows, lay the seeds of a quiet revolution, a revolution fought not on battlefields, but in the kitchens, the marketplaces, and the workplaces of a nation struggling to survive. The chipped enamel mugs, a common sight in every Soviet kitchen, held more than just tea. They held the stories of countless gatherings, whispered conversations, and shared laughter. Each chipped edge, each faded floral pattern spoke of years of use, of countless refills, of moments both mundane and momentous. They were, in their imperfection, perfectly emblematic of the era. We didn't have gleaming modern tableware. We had mugs that had seen better days, mugs that had witnessed arguments and reconciliations, mugs that had absorbed the essence of countless shared meals. And somehow, their imperfection made them more endearing. They were witnesses to our lives, bearing the marks of time and use with a quiet dignity. The same could be said of our apartments. Forget the gleaming chrome and polished surfaces of the West. Our apartments were a tapestry of mismatched furniture, hand-me-down rugs, and walls adorned with family portraits that had seen better days. But within those walls, love bloomed, laughter echoed, and life unfolded in its chaotic, unpredictable glory. A peeling layer of paint on the wall wasn't a sign of neglect. It was a testament to the passage of time, a visual record of our shared history. A wobbly table leg was just another challenge to overcome, a small inconvenience that we addressed with a well-placed book or a strategically positioned cushion. We made do, we adapted, and in that adaptation, we found a strange, comforting resilience. Even the public transportation, a notorious symbol of Soviet inefficiency, held a certain charm. The overcrowded trams, the perpetually delayed buses, the rickety metro cars, they were all part of the landscape of our daily lives. They were spaces of shared experiences where impromptu conversations blossomed and unlikely friendships were forged. The crush of bodies, the jostling for space, the pervasive smell of cabbage and sweat, these were not unpleasantries. They were the very fabric of our existence. It was in these moments of shared discomfort that we discovered a sense of camaraderie, a shared understanding of our collective fate. We learned to find humor in the absurdities. The long queues for everything, bread, milk, even toilet paper, were legendary. But we didn't stand in those queues in silent despair. We used them as opportunities to gossip, to share jokes, to strengthen the bonds of community. The queues became impromptu social gatherings, a chance to catch up with neighbors, to exchange news, to share recipes and stories. It was in these moments, waiting patiently for our turn, that we discovered the art of enduring, of finding joy amidst the hardship. The scarcity of goods only increased our appreciation for the things we did have. The shortages themselves, those chronic companions of our lives, spurred incredible creativity. The absence of readily available goods forced us to improvise, to repair, to reuse, to recycle. Our ingenuity was tested daily, and we responded with resourcefulness that bordered on miraculous. A torn sock became a patch for a worn-out jacket. A broken chair leg was reinforced with a clever application of wire and wood glue. We made do with what we had, transforming limitations into opportunities for ingenuity. And humor played a crucial role. Jokes, often subversive and deeply satirical, became our secret weapons. They allowed us to vent our frustrations, to mock the absurdities of the system, to share our collective experiences without fear of retribution. The jokes circulated in hushed whispers, shared in crowded trams or dimly lit apartments. They were a shared language, a silent rebellion. A joke was a gift, a shared moment of defiance against the oppressive weight of the system. The stories we told were also a form of resistance. They were our counter narrative to the official pronouncements. The stories that we created and shared were often more potent than any official discourse. They were subversive, they were filled with our own individual lived experiences, and they spoke to our experiences more eloquently than any propaganda poster ever could. These stories weren't always happy, but they were honest. They reflected the realities of our lives, the hardships, the disappointments, the moments of joy and resilience. They were our way of preserving our heritage, of keeping our culture alive amidst a system that constantly sought to homogenize it. The imperfections were not flaws, they were the marks of a life lived fully, a life filled with both challenges and unexpected joys. They were the reminders of our resilience, our resourcefulness, our ability to find humor and camaraderie in the face of adversity. The chipped mug, the worn out rug, the overcrowded tram, these were not symbols of failure. They were symbols of our enduring spirit, our ability to adapt, our shared laughter in the face of hardship. Our resilience wasn't a passive acceptance of our circumstances, it was an active engagement with them, a constant process of negotiation and adaptation. We didn't just survive, we thrived. We found beauty in the unexpected, humor in the absurd, and camaraderie in the shared struggle. And in that, there was a peculiar, undeniable charm. It wasn't a romanticized version of the past. It was a nuanced understanding of an era marked by both challenges and unexpected sources of strength. The charm of imperfection lay not in ignoring the hardships, but in recognizing the resilience, ingenuity, and the shared laughter that blossomed amidst the challenges. It was a charm born of survival, of community, and of an enduring human spirit. It was a charm that lingered even long after the era itself had faded. The laughter, the whispered jokes, the resourcefulness, these were the enduring legacies of a time when imperfection held a unique and undeniable charm. And it is those memories, those imperfect but treasured fragments, that continue to shape my understanding of the past and illuminate my present. The warmth of a shared meal, the comforting familiarity of a worn out armchair, the echoing laughter in a crowded tram. These were the simple joys that made our lives, in their imperfections, unexpectedly beautiful. These were the details that gave our lives texture, depth, and a certain poignant charm that persists to this day. The legacy of that era isn't found only in the grand narratives of history books, but in the quiet, almost imperceptible details of everyday life. The way we mended clothes, the resourcefulness with which we stretched our meager rations, the ingenious ways we found to circumvent the endless bureaucracy. These were the true marks of our resilience. These were the stories that weren't told in official pronouncements, but whispered in hushed tones in kitchens and hallways, passed down through generations like precious family heirlooms. They were the stories that fueled our collective spirit, providing a sense of shared humanity and understanding in a system designed to control every aspect of our lives. The imperfections were a reflection of our humanity, of our capacity for resilience, our ability to find joy and camaraderie in the face of adversity. And within these imperfections, in the shared struggles and quiet triumphs, lay a strange and enduring beauty that continues to resonate today. It was a beauty born of necessity, ingenuity, and a collective spirit that refused to be broken by a system that tried to control every aspect of life. The enduring charm of imperfection was ultimately a testament to the remarkable strength and resourcefulness of the human spirit. The cues, the cues. They were a ubiquitous feature of Soviet life, a silent, ever present testament to the inherent scarcity that permeated our existence. Cues for bread, cues for milk, cues for butter, cues for shoes, even cues for the privilege of queuing for something else. They snaked around corners, spilled into streets, and sometimes, it felt, stretched all the way to the horizon. One could easily spend a significant portion of their day simply waiting. And yet, within the apparent monotony of these endless lines, a strange, unexpected social dynamic unfolded. It wasn't the silence of resignation you might expect. Oh no, the cues were far from silent. They were humming, buzzing, vibrant ecosystems of human interaction. The air crackled with a peculiar energy, a mixture of frustration, anticipation, and the surprisingly potent cocktail of shared suffering. The shared hardships created an unusual camaraderie, a sense of solidarity born from the mutual understanding of our collective plight. Initially, the cues felt like an imposition, a theft of time, a daily ritual of frustration. But as the years wore on, and the lines continued their seemingly endless dance through our lives, I began to appreciate their unexpected benefits. The cues, in their own peculiar way, were a school of life. They were harsh teachers, but effective ones. They taught patience, a virtue not always readily available in the frantic pace of modern life. The long wait for even the most basic necessities was a lesson in delayed gratification, a lesson we were forced to learn day in and day out. And then there was the art of conversation. The cues weren't just places of waiting, they were impromptu forums, spontaneous gatherings where conversations blossomed and unlikely connections were forged. It was a curious blend of strangers forced into involuntary intimacy. We gossiped, we shared secrets, we exchanged recipes, we offered each other encouragement and sympathy. We discussed the latest news, the rumors, the anxieties that permeated our lives. And all of this was done with a quiet efficiency, a tacit understanding of the unspoken rules of cue etiquette. Cutting in line was a social taboo of the highest order. It was a cardinal sin met with swift and effective collective disapproval. The conversations, however, were not always light-hearted. Often, they were punctuated by expressions of frustration, shared grievances against the system, the pervasive bureaucracy, the ever-present shortages. But even in those moments of collective discontent, there was a sense of solidarity, a shared understanding of our collective struggles. We were, after all, united in our shared experience, bound together by the common thread of our shared waiting. I remember one particular queue, a seemingly endless line for sugar. It stretched for what felt like miles, winding its way through the city streets. The sun beat down mercilessly. The air hung heavy with the scent of exhaust fumes and sweat. Yet amidst this seemingly oppressive atmosphere, the most remarkable conversations took place. An elderly woman, her face etched with the lines of a long life, shared stories of her youth, her memories of a time before the shortages, Before the cues, a young mother clutching her baby confided her anxieties about the future, the challenges of raising a child in a time of constant scarcity. A young man, his eyes bright with optimism, shared his hopes and dreams for a better life. We learned to bring our work with us to the cues. Knitting needles clicked rhythmically, creating a comforting soundtrack to our collective weight. Children played quiet games, their laughter a temporary reprieve from the pervasive tension. The cues were a microcosm of society, a reflection of our collective strengths and weaknesses. They were a mirror reflecting our resilience, our ability to find community even amidst the most challenging circumstances. But the cues weren't simply a testing ground for patience and community building. They were also a unique form of social commentary. The length of a cue became an indicator of scarcity, a visual representation of the government's failures to meet the basic needs of its citizens. A long queue for bread was a silent protest, a visual demonstration of the system's inefficiencies. It was a passive resistance, a daily reminder of the system's failings. The cues also taught a valuable lesson in resourcefulness. We learned to bring along a book, a magazine, something to occupy our time while we waited. We developed elaborate systems for maximizing our chances of getting the desired goods, making mental notes of which shop had the shortest lines at particular times. It was a constant negotiation, a delicate dance between patience and strategy. In retrospect, the cues weren't merely an inconvenience, they were a crucible of life, shaping character, reinforcing social bonds, and imparting invaluable lessons in patience, resilience, and community. They were a harsh but effective teacher, imparting lessons that extended far beyond the simple act of waiting in line. They were a testament to the human spirit's remarkable capacity to adapt, to find meaning and connection even in the most adverse circumstances. The cues weren't just cues, they were a microcosm of the Soviet experience, a poignant reflection of an era marked by both hardship and an unexpected enduring strength of the human spirit. And those memories, those countless hours spent patiently waiting, those quiet conversations, and the unexpected connections formed in those lengthy lines, they remain with me to this day, a potent reminder of the lessons learned in the unlikely classrooms of Soviet cues. The cues were a part of our lives, inextricably woven into the fabric of our memories, shaping our personalities and shaping the way we understand the world. And in their peculiar way, they taught us more about life, about community, and about the resilience of the human spirit than any formal education ever could. The chipped enamel mugs in the communal kitchen, perpetually stained with the ghosts of countless cups of tea, held more stories than any history book could ever contain. Each crack, each faded floral pattern, whispered the tales of laughter, whispered secrets, and the quiet endurance of a people weathering a storm. I remember one particular evening, the air thick with the scent of cabbage soup and the low hum of conversation, when old Anya, her eyes twinkling like distant stars, regaled us with a story of her escape from the clutches of a particularly inept housing official. It involved a strategically placed bucket of suspiciously acquired potatoes, a healthy dose of well-timed theatrics, and a surprisingly effective display of feigned indignation. The room erupted in laughter, a wave of sound that washed over the usual weariness, momentarily erasing the weight of daily struggles. That laughter, raw and unfiltered, was a testament to the indomitable spirit of the people, a defiant assertion of joy in the face of relentless hardship. The resilience wasn't just confined to individual acts of defiance, it permeated the very fabric of our society, manifesting in countless small ways. The resourceful ingenuity with which people mended clothes, repurposed old materials, and turned scarcity into creativity was nothing short of remarkable. A worn out coat became a patchwork masterpiece, a testament to the wearer's determination. A broken appliance, a challenge to be overcome, a puzzle to be solved, often with ingenuity born from necessity rather than technical expertise. These weren't mere repairs, they were acts of defiance, quiet assertions of independence, in a system designed to control every aspect of our lives. Our collective gardens, small plots of land scratched from the earth, were another testament to our determination. Each tiny sprout, each carefully nurtured tomato, represented a victory, a small rebellion against the drab uniformity of the state-controlled farms. These weren't merely vegetables, they were symbols of hope, a tangible manifestation of self-sufficiency, a tiny act of resistance against a system that attempted to dictate every aspect of our lives. The shared pride, the quiet satisfaction of a bountiful harvest transcended the meager yield. It was a celebration of resilience, of community, of the human spirit's enduring capacity to find nourishment, both literal and metaphorical, in the most challenging circumstances. Even the bleakest landscapes seemed to hold a certain beauty, a kind of stark grandeur. The relentless gray of the city streets, the monotonous architecture of the apartment blocks, were softened by the resilience of the human spirit, transformed by the vibrant tapestries of life woven into their fabric. Children's games echoed in the courtyards, their joyous shrieks a potent counterpoint to the ubiquitous gray. Old women gossiped on park benches, their words a vibrant symphony of shared experiences and whispered secrets. The everyday rituals, the shared struggles, forged unexpected bonds, a kind of unspoken solidarity that was both comforting and empowering. These were not simply spaces of survival, they were spaces of community, resilience, and unexpected joy. Music played a significant role in this resilience. The songs, often passed down through generations, carried a quiet power, a subtle rebellion against the official narratives. They were coded messages of hope, of longing for freedom, of a shared human experience that transcended political boundaries. The melodies, melancholic yet defiant, echoed the collective spirit, offering a solace that was both intensely personal and profoundly communal. The music played not only in concert halls, but in cramped apartments, in the bustling marketplaces, even in the long, seemingly endless queues. It was a constant hum, a background track to our lives, reminding us of our shared humanity and offering a balm to the soul. The stories we shared, the jokes we told, the myths we perpetuated, they all served as a form of resistance, a quiet rebellion against the regime's attempt to control our minds and our spirits. Each anecdote, each whispered secret was a small act of defiance, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit's ability to find humor, to create meaning, to connect with one another remained unbroken. Remember the legendary tale of the missing sausage? It was a joke, of course, but the joke carried a deeper meaning. It spoke of the systemic shortages, the constant struggle to acquire even the most basic necessities. Yet within that joke lay a kind of perverse pride, a shared understanding that we could laugh in the face of adversity, that our ability to find humor in the absurdity of our situation was a testament to our resilience. The resilience wasn't always expressed in overt acts of defiance. Often, it was a quieter, more subtle strength, the strength of a mother protecting her child, the strength of a neighbor helping a neighbor, the strength of a community coming together in the face of hardship. The collective strength of those who were able to draw together, even if it was only through a shared moment of frustration or laughter within a queue, was astonishing. It was in these everyday acts of kindness, of compassion, of shared humanity that the true strength of the human spirit shone through. This wasn't simply a matter of survival, it was a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to adapt, to find meaning, to create joy, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. It was a quiet revolution, played out not on battlefields, but in the kitchens, in the queues, in the courtyards, in the hearts and minds of ordinary people. It was a revolution of resilience, a revolution of hope, a revolution of the human spirit, undaunted and unbroken. And it was a story that deserved to be told, not as a tale of victimhood, but as a testament to the incredible capacity of the human spirit to endure, to adapt, and to ultimately to thrive. It was a story etched not in grand narratives, but in the chipped enamel mugs, the worn out coats, and the laughter echoing in the communal kitchens of a nation that, despite its challenges, refused to be broken. It was a story, in fact, that continues to resonate, a reminder that the human spirit, even when pushed to its limits, possesses an incredible ability to not just survive, but to flourish. The memory of those times remains a profound testament to the enduring power of hope, resilience, and the unshakable strength of the human spirit. The chipped enamel mugs, the mended coats, the laughter in the communal kitchens, these were the tangible remnants of a system that promised utopia but delivered a complex, often contradictory reality. From the vantage point of a post-Soviet world, the ghost of that utopian ideal still haunts the landscape of my memories, a spectral presence both alluring and chilling. The irony, of course, is palpable. The very things that allowed us to survive, our ingenuity, our resilience, our shared laughter, were, in a twisted way, a testament to the system's failings. The grand narrative of communist progress, the promised land of equality and abundance, fell spectacularly short, yet out of its ashes bloomed a remarkable spirit of human endurance. Remember the posters? The heroic workers, their faces radiating a utopian glow, their hands gripping tools of progress. They hung everywhere, plastering over the cracks in the facade, a constant reminder of the idealized future that remained tantalizingly out of reach. Those posters, faded now, like the memories they represented, are a poignant reminder of the regime's relentless propaganda campaign. It aimed to shape our perceptions, to mold our minds into a single, unified whole, a collective marching towards a shining communist dawn. The reality, however, was far more nuanced, a tapestry woven with threads of hope and despair, of triumph and tragedy, a chaotic blend that defied easy categorization. The absurdity of it all sometimes bordered on the comical. I recall queuing for bread, a seemingly endless line of stoic faces, the air thick with the scent of stale flour and simmering resentment. And yet, amidst the monotony, the shared frustration somehow fostered a strange camaraderie. We shared jokes, whispered complaints, traded stories, creating a small, fleeting community within the larger oppressive system. We found humor in our shared suffering, a dark kind of gallows humor, perhaps, but it was a vital lifeline, a testament to the human spirit's ability to find joy even in the bleakest of circumstances. The missing sausage jokes, for example, became legendary, circulating through the community as coded messages, dark observations of the system's incompetence, masked as playful banter. The promised equality remained an elusive dream. While the system aimed to eliminate social hierarchy, it inadvertently created a new one, a hierarchy of privilege and connection rather than wealth and power. Those who had access to the right people, the right information, or simply the right connections found themselves better positioned to navigate the system's complexities. The privileges were subtle, often hidden beneath the surface, yet they created an invisible stratification, a stark contrast to the equality promised in the grand ideological narrative. The system's attempt to control every aspect of our lives, from our jobs to our leisure activities, ironically fostered a deep seated desire for autonomy, for individuality. The more tightly the regime clamped down, the stronger our desire for freedom became. This wasn't a conscious rebellion, it was a quiet, persistent longing, a yearning for self expression that manifested in the smallest of details, a defiant hairstyle, a secretly listened to jazz record, a whispered conversation about something considered dangerous. This was a quiet revolution, a resistance fought not on battlefields, but in the subtle acts of daily life, in the spaces between the cracks of the system. One of the most fascinating aspects of this era was the way in which the culture of scarcity inadvertently bred incredible ingenuity and resourcefulness. We were constantly challenged to make do with less, to find creative solutions to everyday problems. A broken appliance wasn't simply discarded, it was meticulously repaired, often with improvised tools and unconventional methods. Clothes were mended, repurposed, transformed into something new. It wasn't just about practicality, it was about defiance, about asserting our control over our own lives in the face of a system that sought to control everything. This resourcefulness wasn't born out of some inherent trait, but was systematically forged in the crucible of hardship and scarcity. It was a necessary adaptation, a survival mechanism, and yet it also had a kind of beauty to it, a testament to the resilience and creativity of the human spirit. The collective gardens, those tiny plots of land painstakingly cultivated, were more than just sources of food. They were islands of personal autonomy, places where we could exert some control over our lives, where we could connect with nature and nurture life. They were tiny acts of rebellion, declarations of independence in a system that sought to control every aspect of our existence. The quiet satisfaction of a successful harvest, the shared pride of a community thriving despite the regime's attempts to control food production, were moments of profound joy, small victories in the face of overwhelming adversity. Looking back, I see the ghost of utopia not as a monolithic entity, but as a fragmented, contradictory experience. It was a system that promised paradise, but delivered a complex, often paradoxical reality. Yet even in its flaws, even in its failures, it gave rise to a remarkable human spirit, an enduring capacity for resilience, ingenuity, and a defiant joy. The laughter in the communal kitchens, the mended coats, the whispered jokes, the shared stories, these were the true legacies of that era, a testament to the human spirit's ability to not only survive, but to find meaning and create beauty even in the face of adversity. It was a profound lesson in the enduring power of hope, a powerful reminder that even the most oppressive systems cannot extinguish the flame of the human spirit. The ghost of utopia, then, is not just a reminder of a failed dream, but a celebration of the enduring strength of the human spirit, a spirit that persists despite, and perhaps because of, the oppressive systems it faces. The laughter still echoes in my ears, a testament to the resilience that blossoms even in the hardest of times. The vodka flowed freely that night, a crimson tide washing over the chipped glasses, mirroring the blush creeping onto our faces. It wasn't a celebratory occasion, not in the traditional sense. There were no speeches praising the party or the glorious achievements of the Soviet Union. No, this was a toast to something far more profound, far more complex, a toast to the sheer, breathtaking absurdity of it all. We sat huddled around a table in Dmitri's cramped apartment, the air thick with the scent of cheap cigarettes and lingering borscht. The flickering light of a single bulb cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, highlighting the peeling paint and the cracks in the plaster, silent witnesses to years of hardship and resilience. We were a motley crew, a collection of individuals bound together by the shared experience of a life lived under the iron fist of the Soviet regime. There was Anya, the sharp-tongued librarian whose secret stash of forbidden literature had almost landed her in Siberia. There was Boris, the perpetually optimistic engineer who could repair anything with a piece of wire and a prayer. And there was old Mikhail, the retired history professor whose eyes held a lifetime of unspoken stories, stories of both triumph and tragedy, stories that painted a far more complicated picture of the Soviet past than the official narratives would allow. The conversation drifted, meandering like a lazy river, touching on everything from the infamous bread queues, each tale adding a new layer of frustration and dark humor, to the audacity of forging ration coupons, a criminal act, yet an essential act of survival that was somehow normalized. We chuckled, we reminisced, we shared stories that would probably have landed us in trouble had someone from the KGB been listening in. I remember one anecdote from Anya, who, with a mischievous glint in her eye, recounted the time she outsmarted the local party official. He had tried to requisition her prized pet rabbit, a plump and exceedingly fluffy creature named Fluffy, for a celebration hosted by a visiting dignitary. Anya, with a show of feigned obedience, handed over a rabbit, a different rabbit, a skinny, sickly thing she'd found scavenging near the river. The dignitary, a man who was clearly more accustomed to champagne and caviar than rabbit stew, only seemed vaguely disturbed at the taste and texture. We erupted into laughter, the memory as absurd as it was audacious. The absurdity extended beyond individual acts of defiance. The entire system seemed to be a grand, elaborate joke, a cruel paradox. The state proclaimed its unwavering commitment to equality, yet the reality was one of privilege, of subtle hierarchies. There was the blat, the network of connections that allowed some to access goods and services beyond the reach of the masses. It wasn't about wealth. It was about knowing the right people, having the right kind of connections. The blat was a social currency, a form of wealth all its own. The entire system operated on a system of subtle contradictions, promises that were seldom kept, ideals that remained tragically unrealized. And yet, within this absurdity, there existed a strange kind of beauty, the beauty of human resilience, of an ingenuity born out of necessity, the way we adapted, the way we improvised, the way we found humor in the bleakest of situations. This was a testament to the human spirit's enduring ability to survive and even thrive under the most challenging conditions. We spoke of the ingenuity of the collective farms. The official narrative depicted them as idyllic socialist enterprises, efficient engines of food production. The reality, however, was far more nuanced. They were often inefficient, plagued by mismanagement and poor planning. But they weren't completely devoid of innovation. Peasants, driven by the need to feed their families, developed their own clever workarounds, their own systems for maximizing yield. They shared seeds, shared knowledge, created their own informal networks of support that went above and beyond the officially prescribed systems. It was a quiet revolution, a testament to the enduring power of human collaboration and adaptation. The collective gardens represented a small but meaningful act of rebellion. Those tiny plots of land, painstakingly cultivated on evenings and weekends, represented a degree of autonomy, a way of maintaining a connection to the land, and a way to supplement the meager rations. It was a space where we had control, a small pocket of defiance in a world relentlessly seeking to impose its control. We remember the songs, the jokes, the stories passed around, the coded language that allowed us to make comments on the system and express our emotions without attracting the attention of the authorities. Even the black market was a perverse example of entrepreneurial spirit, a vibrant ecosystem built on scarcity. The irony is striking. In trying to control everything, to suppress every hint of individuality, the Soviet regime inadvertently fostered creativity, resourcefulness, and an incredible sense of community, a tight-knit network of shared experiences that helped buffer against the hardships of daily life. It created a culture of resilience, an understanding that there is always something to be done, a way to make it better. The state might have controlled the material aspects of our lives, but it could not control our minds, our spirits, our laughter. As the night wore on, the vodka fueled a torrent of memories, good, bad, funny, tragic, painting a picture far more complex than the official narratives would allow. The absurdity, the hardships, the unexpected beauty, all weaved together in a tapestry of experiences. Our final toast wasn't to the utopian dream that had gone so spectacularly wrong. It was to the tenacity of the human spirit, to the resilience born of adversity, to the laughter that echoes even through the darkest of times. It was a toast to the absurdities, the ironies, the unexpected triumphs, and the enduring strength that allowed us to not only survive, but to find moments of joy and meaning, even in a system designed to crush them. It was a toast to the ghosts of utopia, a bittersweet recognition of a past that, despite its flaws, shaped us into the people we are today. A toast to life in all its chaotic and unpredictable glory. And as the last drops of vodka were consumed, a quiet understanding settled amongst us, a shared knowledge of a past that was both profoundly difficult and, in a strange, unexpected way, profoundly beautiful.